All right, here we are on day 233. I have Sina and Joe, and we're gonna do like a group therapy session. Most of our group is not here, but everybody is doing their own work and their own thing. People are at gatherings. People are at different there's a conference half of them are at, it seems. They keep sending us photos from these different conferences. Arama keeps sending, I don't know, she sends selfies with Norman Finkelstein and Cornell West and Immortal Technique. I don't know. So she's clearly doing something. Um, Everybody's doing stuff. So, you know, it's been such a week. I think we can just free flow. I mean, it's been such a week, right? Like the week started with the death of the Iranian president. Um, and then
Oh yeah.
yesterday, the Qassam captured another Israeli soldier or some covert operator or something. The Israeli Yair Netanyahu, the son of the prime minister, released a video saying threatening a military coup against Yoav Gallant. I mean, and that's like the beginning and the end. In between, the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to stop all offensive operations in Rafah, and Israel ignored it. The International Criminal Court, that was this week too, guys. The International Criminal Court or made arrest warrants against Hamas leaders and Israeli leaders. It's like this wasn't a week. I don't know. This was like a week of where decades, one of those weeks where decades happen, but like really a week where decades happen.
Yeah, any
Um,
one of those things are something you could almost talk about at length under
yeah,
normal conditions.
any one of those things you would be talking about trying to process, and it's like we can't even and then a speech from Nasrallah and a speech from I mean Abu Ubaidah, of course, had to make a speech yesterday because of what happened. I mean, I like feeling wise, if I were to talk about how I feel this week, it's like completely I can't I can't I can't make an individual analysis of how I feel. It's like there's just so many things. I'm totally overwhelmed. My nervous system is overwhelmed, my brain is overwhelmed, and it's like all I can do is try to track it and just describe it. Holy cow. Holy moly.
I think there is a kind of problem to our method in
Yeah.
how we think about these things, because I think the typical kind of, not just academic, but the kind of, Western
Mhm.
educated
Mhm.
person thinks in the context of there. I think that, like, even if people don't know that they write essays, they end up doing so because
Yeah.
we've been trained in the sense of collecting evidence. And in this
Yeah.
case, it's like evidence from the war or evidence from some sort of politicking or something said by some important person or some institution, right? And you try to collate those things and stitch an argument together, and that's just what we do. That's what we do on the show. That's what we do in
Yeah.
our individual works. That's what you do in your research. And we try to do it on Twitter or whatever, or X,
Yeah.
whatever it's called. But ultimately, like, the single perspective and like the mind of
Mhm.
some part of a viewer of all this, we can't handle this. Like,
We
this is
can't
not
handle it,
something
man.
that
It's not
we
humanly
can.
possible
There's
to handle
Yeah,
this. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's too much, and forget the fact that our things are coming to us like second order, right? Is that the
Yeah.
representations
Yeah.
of these historic events are what we are discussing, not the events themselves. Right. And
And
so, like, already there's that important layer of Orientalism that's
yeah.
sewn into everything we say. And even if we try to disavow it, even if we work hard to undo these like centuries of representation, you can't help but think, like the framing around all of this, right? Oh, Hamas hostages, Israeli,
Yeah.
like Israeli effort, right? And so, like, these are Herculean things to sort of to sort of penetrate through. And
Hmm.
there's a reason why, like, the sort of centuries of ideological kind of headwork, or like whatever you want to say, like
Yeah.
the groundwork for all of this has been laid for an event like this that is so colossal, which is to say October 7th and the ensuing genocide. Is that the, like, I mean, and this is the final thing I'll say before handing it off, like, the what a bunch of like besieged Gazans did is that they turned world history upside down,
Yeah.
right? Is that they forced an entire world system to recalibrate
Yeah.
its global geostrategic strategy. Like it's like, or its play. I
Yeah.
don't know, how, what do you want to say, playbook,
Yeah.
right? Like these besieged Gazans, like a 1.5 million, 2 million
It's two.
population of Gaza,
It's supposed
right?
to be
Yeah,
over
it's supposed to
two.
be
Yeah.
two. I mean, it was, but
Yeah. Who
the
knows? Yeah.
idea that this one little chunk of history is going to is going to play out in so many different ways for decades, if not centuries to come,
Yeah.
is that, and then it's really these besieged, and the more this goes on, like that's the more it's evident to me that and once again, it's dudes in sandals,
Yeah.
like who are outdoing the best laid plans of the imperialists. I mean, I don't think we don't have the tools. All we have is Hollywood movies to
No,
process this,
when you
right? Like
said
that's all we
turning,
have. We
like when you said like turning it into an essay, I felt that with Raisi's death. I felt like, the funerals were so huge, right? And there were these massive, massive funerals, so many world leaders paying their respects. There was a moment of silence at the UN, and it was like people couldn't help but make an argument like, hey, see, you said he wasn't popular, but he is. And it's like you have to frame it as an argument, and you can't like experience this moment of, this is a moment of mourning. This is a moment, it's an overwhelming moment, right? Like it's an overwhelming thing that happened at the beginning of the week that like we still don't know if it was foul play. We still have so many questions about what happened. There's still so many mysteries about it. And it's like, how could this have happened? How could one helicopter crash? Like, how could there be a cloud for one helicopter and not the other two, and only the important one? Like, not that, you know what I mean. Only
Mm.
the one carrying the president and the foreign minister. Like and without all of those, without any answers to those questions, the ICC produces their indictments, this overwhelming event, and then the ICJ orders a halt to operations, and then yeah, it's true. We try to make frames, we try to make debates out of it, polemics out of it, and then have these polemical arguments. But I'm also tired of that. Like I'm so tired of trying to counter argue with people who don't accept our humanity, and like who don't accept the humanity of the mass of people. And it's like every these days when I see counterpoints and like talking points against Zionism, and like I can't handle it anymore. I'm just like,
We gotta be beyond that.
yeah, we gotta get beyond that, right?
Yeah. Can I just say to that point? I want to talk real mention because I think these polls, you guys must, maybe you've seen them. A lot of people who follow us probably seen them, but I think it's worth stressing that back in March there were two polls that came out, one by Gallup and one by Pew, and both these, okay, I mean, right up front, these are establishment organizations whose most important funders are other establishment organizations like the media, so you have to factor that in. But according to them, like the Pew poll said that 22% of its respondents say Hamas's reasons for fighting Israel are valid, and and at the same time they say only 22% of the respondents actually say they're following the situation. So
Hmm.
a lot of that, it tells me right away, like 22% is huge. Like that, I think 22% of like 160 million eligible voters in the US who basically, that is massive. So you organize that percentage, right? I mean, wow, what could you do with that? I mean, why are you even trying to, like, in my
Yeah.
opinion, why are you wasting your time with other people who are so disengaged or just racist and won't accept facts anyway, right? And another Gallup poll from this one was commissioned by a group I no longer respect, but anyways, this Gallup poll found that 52% say do not stop arms shipments to Israel. So 52% of the U.S. saying stop arms shipments to Israel. I mean, huge. Now, at the same time, not the cherry pick. I mean, even if you look at the Pew poll, it's something like only 5% say that the way Hamas carried out the October 7th attacks was justified. So it looks like but there's been an overwhelming media, even in progressive media like Jacobin and even The Intercept, buying into the whole mass rapes. I mean, they pushed back now, but they were a big push to justify or legitimize the mass rapes. So there you can see where that's cut through, and people are not yet willing to go as far as say, no, October 7th was actually legitimate armed resistance. Wasn't perfect, never is, right? A violent struggle always is gonna be messy, but so I'm just saying that, but even if you consider 5%, like 5% is still in the United States context, that's like what,
Millions.
8 million people, like 8 million people. Like, my God, what you could do if you could organize that many people to actually be active, right? So anyways, I think that's, if you look at polls, and again, I think the left should organize itself to do its own polls and not rely on these establishment outfits to do it. I think there's a lot of important questions that these guys will never ask. We need to answer, and that we should be asking and getting feedback on. So, and I think it's an antidote to a lot of any temptation to feel despair or. I mean, rage that's all natural. I mean, we can't begrudge people rage or even feeling down about things that are happening because it's just overwhelming. But I personally, I don't feel like entitled to despair. I mean, I see Palestinians are doing. I just feel like that's cowardly for me to feel despair. I'm not entitled to it. I don't have any justification for feeling that.
You
So
reinforce,
yeah. That's what I just wanted to throw that out there.
I think we lost Cena, hopefully temporarily. He'll probably be back, but
yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there because I think if you look at polls, I don't see grounds for despair there. I mean, when you consider how overwhelming the propaganda is, and like you say, it speaks to your point. Is that why are we even engaging with people who don't get it or don't want to get it or just.
There's a chart I want to show you guys that I've been thinking about whenever they talk about, and here I am engaging as you warned against at the beginning, Cena, like here I am engaging in counter arguments because I can't help it. But like there's this, this chart, like, these charts people have for like mental health, like how do you feel, right? These are my point in showing this chart is I have 2 points. One is like there are a finite number of human emotions. And like everybody recognizes this as like a set of human emotions. And so when I hear people talk about like the feelings of Jewish students, when pro-Israel, I mean, when Palestine is mentioned or when at the encampments or whatever, I'm just like, okay, which of these feelings is it? Like there's a list, you're human beings, there's a list of human feelings. Let's talk about these feelings because it's not because you have this feeling, because you have this emotion, it doesn't mean you get to smash students over the head with wooden planks or light fireworks on them or, assault them with call the police on them or, have police like the cute, City University of New York police officer who said, yes, I support genocide. I support killing all you people. So like this is an ideology of racial supremacy down to this level of like, there are special feelings for special people that are not common to humanity. And those feelings matter more than everything. They matter more than international law. They matter more than humanity. They matter more than life and death. These feelings are more important than life and death of everybody else.
Right.
Yeah, this is something that I've thought about a lot. I thought about this a lot recently, about how we're in this era where power pretends to care about our feelings.
Yeah.
Right. And like I know I sound like Foucauldian in that ways that I use this kind of conglomerate thing called power.
Called power, yeah.
But like you can do you can do like Marxist, you could say like, oh, the ruling classes, like that works too. Yeah, whatever. But ultimately there is this massive, and it's across the political spectrum, across cultural spectrum, and largely and it's something that's almost global in scale, not completely, but we are in this era where the people who rule over us and like have made it have let me put it this way, they've adopted this era, this fictional, obviously, completely fictional pretense that the concern for our feelings and how things are going on inside of us, right? That like this is something
Mhm.
that is of utmost concern to the outside world, right? That
Yes.
these things inside of us, right, reflect something bigger at a national level, at a regional level, at a local level, right? And so that's also the same logic, incidentally, that animates the social science thinking around polls, right? Is that then you select across spectrum, you pay these companies who have
Mhm.
this information on people who will pick up the phone, right? And these people stand in for demographic categories that we deem to be visible, worthwhile, like consider worthy of
Mhm.
incorporation into our political. But we all know the fucking truth, guys. We are ruled over by sociopathic monsters who don't care what we say or how we feel, as long
Yeah.
as we keep producing and keep working and die on cue when we stop being productive, like members of like neoliberal society. Like this is the strange, absurd sort of 1-2 punch of neoliberalism. On the one hand, it demands that you work, that it brutalize you and tell you like, oh, here, have everything, like do everything, consume, like, and this goes
Mhm.
across the class spectrum, incidentally. Like
Mhm.
rich people work hard too. They work
Yeah.
really hard, in fact, like 80, 90 hours a week. But like, but our societies, like neoliberalism has done such a number on us as like a species almost, because it is global, that we've come to actually think that our feelings matter in all of
Well,
this.
it's, I mean,
Now,
when you bring that question, like the labor issue to the Israel context, it's actually very interesting because Israelis as settlers are not really supposed to work. So there's been this whole contradiction of like the Israelis are here to labor Zionism is we are here to conquer the jobs. Like we are here to take the jobs from the natives. We take the land from the natives and we work the land. But then they don't actually part of being a settler is also that other people do your work for you and your life is subsidized and everything is laid out for you like it's a vacation kind of lifestyle. And if and it's always been this problem for them, which is like Palestinians do the work, do the actual work. And now that post October 7th, they've decided Palestinians aren't doing the work. Their economy is in kind of bad shape in ways they're not really talking about much. They're trying to bring Indian people in, but as racists, they don't want to change the demographic balance of Israel by bringing a bunch of Indian people. That's not better than having a bunch of Palestinians. So like it always returns to this racial psychology and it's constantly thrown in our face how much they think like the extent that they think they're separate and better than all of the rest of us, like the white supremacy of this whole thing is is constantly being emphasized even in the like the ICC judgment, the way that they talked about it. I was listening to John Mearsheimer the other day, and the way that John Mearsheimer, I kind of ranted about this with John Elmer on a sit rep, but the way that Mearsheimer says Israel will never, after October 7th, Israel will never accept a Palestinian state because it means more October 7th could happen. And it's like, why does everything happen in terms of what Israel accepts? Why does that override? Why there's no question of what Palestinians will accept? It occurred to me like, why would Palestinians ever disarm? Why would they ever disarm? Why would you ever like the Palestinian state has to be armed to the teeth because of how they're next to an insane hyper armed society. Of course they have to be armed. They could never disarm. They would be fools to disarm. So it's like the way that the society works and can't work long term. And it also for me like the when you said Sina earlier that like the small group, not even the whole Palestinian society, but like the 2 million in Gaza have overturned history. It's like you also realize how central the project of Israel is to all of these elites. Like they all line up with every new thing that happens. They all line up. Like Trudeau was like, "Oh, you can't compare Israeli democratic leaders." After we're past 40,000 dead. We've all watched tens of thousands. The things we've watched. And then Trudeau says you can't equate them to bloodthirsty like and I kind of feel like I'm just tired of like tired of trying to appeal to the humanity of these people. They're not the whatever
what humanity? Liberals don't have humanity. They're sociopathic monsters.
That's what I mean. Whatever human structure of feeling that we kind of rely on to behave and to work in our daily lives. They don't have. They obviously don't have. Nobody normal could have that reaction.
Yeah. And they also, about the feelings thing, you know, we got to care about the feelings. It's also contradicted by the fact that a Pew poll again showed recently that something like 85% of the respondents say that the rulers don't care what they think, and that's accurate. Of course, that's accurate, and it's widely internalized. Even in this establishment pollster finds that, well, the majority of people just conclude that they don't give a fuck what you think. Yeah. Which you always include your feelings, right? Because your feelings are part of what you think. So they don't care. It's widely accepted. So then the question becomes, well, what do you do? What do you do about it? Okay, so what do you do about it? So and again, I stress that you have to focus on the people who are getting it. You know, you have to focus on and not on the people who are not getting it. And it also, I think another point that comes from that, from Trudeau and from all this, you know, and the propaganda that reaches even into the so-called establishment outlets like Jacobin and stuff like that. It shows that the way propaganda works isn't by convincing people that they're wrong. That their propaganda is correct. It's trying to convince them that they're totally alone.
Yes.
You know, you're totally alone. You don't believe it, but you know what? You're totally isolated. Nobody agrees with you. But when you actually look closely at the poll and say, no, actually a shit ton of people agree with you.
Well, yeah, and the encampments. I mean, that like I consider myself like a veteran of the Palestine movement, you know, like I've been here for decades. And like there's nobody in these encampments that has any idea who I am, or you know, like there's this whole generation that has done a whole bunch of stuff. And I played no part in it. I didn't sow the seeds. I didn't like make the roots of this movement. So there are people who get it. I don't know what that says about.
I mean, the question. Yeah, exactly. What does getting it mean in our alienated, hyper individualized, sort of hyper monadic sort of existence as neoliberal subjects? Now, I should have finished my thought earlier, which I rarely do because they are so rambling. But is that the value of our insides don't matter to them until they do. So this is my thing, is that this is like, no revolution could ever happen if people's feelings weren't activated to such a point that they decided to stop participating in the structuring normalcy of their everyday life, right? Yeah. It's clear to me so far that despite all the good work that the Palestinians and their allies around the world have done for almost a century now, right? There's been multiple generations of people who have fought for Palestine, either literally or in the sort of discursive sense. I mean, and you can include that to us. And also, by the way, people know your sit reps, and people watch a lot of it. I go to protest in my little show. People are like, "Yeah, you see that from East is a podcast." So like, I'm the first one to dismiss our yammering on here as like whatever. But ultimately, media matters in this struggle.
Joe is the last one to dismiss our yammering on here. So we have the first one and the last one today. So
yes, exactly. But ultimately, like, there can be a horizon that we can imagine where the disgust and the open villainy of the Israeli regime and all of its allies around the world, including our lab-grown prime minister, that people will be so disgusted with this that they will decide to sort of stop participating in the normalcy of the everyday. Now, at UCLA, for instance, what the criminal things that they did to those students, those courageous, heroic students. I mean, this is my alma mater, even though I hate that term. But like, this is like, I walked by the buildings where they were doing this stuff. And the police could have stopped it at any time. Like the police could have stopped. So they were working with
an alma is a
alma
soul,
mater,
right? An alma is a soul. I
my
wonder what
mother's
yeah,
soul,
it
something
must
like
be
that.
yours.
This is corny.
Yeah.
I know. It's a corny. It's a corny.
I never
like,
thought of what
yeah,
those
I
words
know.
mean
It's very
until you
cheesy.
said it. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't do philology. It only leads to bad things.
It only
But
leads
like
to bad
there
things.
is like there can I think there is a major crisis in Zionism simply because its own actions and the words of its own proponents, its leaders, its institutions spanning the globe from the West. It's not some unique thing to Slovakia. It's not just unique to Canada. This is a global movement of Zionists, and the most wretched fascist movements allied with it, who are all going full mask off.
Yeah.
And the mask offiness of this moment should not be discounted.
Yeah.
That the fact that our rulers had to show their vampire fangs, right, and how they desire, like how they're structuring life, and the politics of everything they do is nourishing this genocidal ethnostate whose clock is ticking louder than like the cat in fucking Alice in Wonderland or whatever that thing was. Like, this is over. Like, this thing is over. They have a moribund project. They have a political class that's dying off. They have no economy. And yet here we are, and that's why like these politicians are defending it, because this is their treasured little project. And they require an army of bribed partisans of the political class. I mean, they have to grease the wheels so much, and they still fail. So like I'll go back to the original point, is that like I guess I didn't make it, but I was kind of going towards it, which was like ultimately the feelings of the people over here in the part of the world that is enabling Zionism do matter, and they have to matter because we are part of it. We are part of the war on Palestine. Our taxes go towards it. So there is an ability on us, but we are not the authors of the Palestine liberation struggle, right? We are third tertiary characters that will be written up in marginal notes of like, oh yeah, there were these international movements, blah, blah, blah. But like, it is on the backs of these Palestinians who are writing this history. And like, that stuff is like, as the despair comes and goes, I'll be real. Like, despair is a real. I mean, this whole week has been like, what the fuck? But I find relief in that. I find relief in knowing that the people who are authoring this history, there's that verb we had problem with when it came to Gaddafi.
Well,
like the people who are authoring this, they are going to be teaching us, and this will be studied centuries to come.
Oh my
like
God.
this is not like, I'm not exaggerating. October 7th rewrote the history of the civilization of humanity, like as a whole. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
It's amazing, actually.
But
we're lucky to be alive.
Like, we knew, like, some of us knew that Palestine was this important, but they had, like you said, to keep, they did a better job of keeping that hidden than they do now. Like the fundamental nature of Israel to their project, and the fundamental nature of suppressing the Palestinians to their project is real. Since it's just the three of us though, and like specifically you two, I was thinking, you two, having you two together makes me think of like, because Joe, you tweeted the other day that what we need to do is learn from Latin America, because if you have a rigged electoral system, Latin America's shown that you can overcome that. And Sina, like you said, the Palestinians are the authors of this, but like Iran, the Palestinians, Nizar Banat and like lots of others are the first to say like this is not possible without Iran's support. And you just think of like how like the Palestinians are, like, the other day a Palestinian leader was murdered by the Palestinian Authority, like another one in Tulkarm, like another resistance leader was murdered by the Palestinian Authority. And like they have factions from religious to nationalist, secular to socialist, atheist, and they're all fighting together against Israel. They have the so-called unity of the fields. And like Hezbollah in Lebanon built this party from the 80s. Like, how do they keep it together? Like, how do they keep their organizations together when in North America, like, when I look at the encampments, I'm like, the encampments are going to fall apart not because of repression. They're going to fall apart if university administrators are smart, they'll let them fall apart because of splits between tankies you know, who support Iran or Syria versus people who are like, no, Assad's a butcher, Xinjiang is a genocide in Palestine, like that, all of that we can't seem to overcome when like in Palestine, they're able to overcome differences that include assassinations of one another's groups and still maintain organizational cohesion. If I could identify a difference between the the Middle East right now and North America in terms of anti-genocide people, it's like the ability to maintain an organization intact. I don't know. What do you think, Joe? I want to let Joe talk too about this. Like, what is it about? What do you see as I mean, Latin America is closer to us
Yeah.
culturally and whatever, but like, why do you think it's possible for them and not for us?
Well, I think centuries of, or over at least a century of just debilitating any leadership of the left, infiltrating it,
Hmm.
and sponsoring like if you read the book, the Cultural Cold War, about how the CIA actively
Mm.
promoted an anti-communist left. Sometimes the anti-communist guys knew they were being used, sometimes they didn't, but it didn't matter. They were being used either way. And I think that's had over a long period, that's had a lot of bad impacts. There's a lot of, they sow these divisions, and the Palestinians obviously they're under far more dire situations. They've had to make bigger sacrifices to overcome it. We're at the end of the day, we're still rather pampered,
Mm.
subjects of the imperial core, who maybe don't have the same sense of urgency to overcome those things. That's one unpleasant answer, I guess, or unflattering answer, I guess. But yeah, I just, and it seems also that, I don't know, it seems to me also the most radical people tend to be, they have a radical analysis, but sometimes but they don't want to, they want to dismiss electoral politics entirely. Like, I understand it's
Mm.
rigged, but it's always rigged. Like, of course it's rigged. The question is, how do you overcome that? Like, how do you organize against it? It's not, it's rigged and then leave it there. You have to organize it. That's getting to that next step. For obviously, there's a lot of factors that
I
explain
just
why.
like the way the Communist Party of Canada fell apart in like sex scandal, like and
Yeah,
the UK parties. There's always like a sex scandal in addition to whatever else goes on. There's always these
yeah,
horrific public
mm,
scandals.
right.
I don't know. It's
Yeah, and
I have a pretty like brutal reading on this, which is,
uh-oh.
I don't know how you guys feel about this, but like things are going to get much worse for life for us here. We're not going to be shielded from this
yeah.
world system for much longer, the way we have been for so long. And it will cause such a crisis to the entire system. Like I mean, I said this on Twitter, which was like, the climate catastrophe that's coming,
Mm-hmm.
that's already here, but much, much worse, will
Mm-hmm.
force tens of millions to go north, if not hundreds of
Mm-hmm.
millions.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you can't fathom the kinds of violence that the US regime will employ to protect that border. Like, it will make like the Great March of Racine look like a bake sale
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like what, because this is like, we are heading towards this. And I don't know, guys, is it just that we live too comfortably, what you said, Joe? Like, is it just that we live too comfortably to care, and we'll start caring, and then the contradictions will come out, and all the sociopathies that have been inculcated us through our media system for decades and decades, and will the sort of, as if it's like some sort of like financial object, like, will these yield finally all the hatreds and like violence that the system has like built into us, in terms of, oh, I hate this guy because he looks like this, and I hate him because he's gay, and whatever, and let's turn on them. And because these are not like latent feelings in our society, and they're full of our societies are full of bigots. And I wonder what the collapse of our comforts would do to that. If I mean that will, I can assure you, that will force people to be more political. I wonder
Mhm.
if it could be done without before that happens. Is my question to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, but there's the kind of political that you're talking about, and then there's the question of organization, and ultimately, as I've been saying on the sit reps, like ultimately the military question, the question of how, like, it's one thing to say the U.S. will be ultra violent because it has a ultra violent, Zionist and Protestant culture, whatever, but like the ability to deploy that violence depends on organization, and the organization to deploy that violence, I think, peaked a while ago. So I don't know if they're going to have the cohesion to apply ultra violence the way that, like, even the March of Return, the March of Return, they were sitting ducks, right? Like it's different too. It's you can see the difference between the way the Israelis handled the
Well, it's a
March of
much bigger
Return.
border. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a much bigger border, obviously, to
yeah.
defend.
You're shooting fish in a barrel, as close to that metaphor as possible. They committed to nonviolence before anything started. They said, no matter what you do to us, we're gonna be nonviolent. So the Israelis just let all of their psychotic um, bullets fly. But
Yeah.
it's not, the October 7th was not like that. It was not like that. And so Israel, I think Israel is a great example of this. Israel is an example of a society that is more than willing to deploy absolute genocidal violence. But the question is, what is their ability to do that violence trending up or down? If it was trending up, they would have had an answer for Lebanon by now. They're hesitating. I sooner or later they're going to attack Lebanon, I think, and they're going to lose precisely because of this. They are hesitating. There's a rational part of them shrinking. There's a shrinking rational part of them or faction among them that knows that their means to deploy violence is out of whack with their desire to deploy violence. And you're right that it's gonna explode, but we have to let's take the analysis past that point and say, okay, it explodes, and then they start unraveling in various ways, and then how do you organize a society to counter that? How do you organize a society to and it's the same kinds of things, like if you're an apocalyptic kind of thinker, which is another thing that's popular in North America. The
Also,
Palestinians are,
Shias
yeah,
love the apocalypse.
yeah,
Come
you
on,
have
brother.
both. You have both. You have both of those modes. But like but this is part of my point. Like Palestinians are living the apocalypse. Like they are doing things in the apocalypse. Whatever apocalypse you think might come here, it's hard to imagine it would be worse than what's happening in Gaza now. Like this is the apocalypse for them. Like every single building is being destroyed. And this is like why we started tanky therapy. I keep thinking like Macklemore's song came out in between the last few tanky therapies, and it's like there's a line in Macklemore's song that I can't, every time I hear it, I get choked up because he just says like, "What if you were in Gaza?" You know? And like it's that is an apocalypse. It's an apocalyptic situation. So you don't have to. I guess the upshot of that is you can think past an apocalyptic situation, and you can actually see how people behave and what they do and how they can maintain military organization and various capacities even in the midst of apocalypse. So
Yeah. Well, again, the big lesson I think the Palestinians teach us is not to overestimate the enemy.
mhm,
That then
mhm,
you defeat yourself. They don't have to defeat you. If you
yeah,
defeat yourself, right? So that's why that's why I pointed out to these polls initially as saying that the propaganda system so overwhelming, so isolating, but you can see big cracks in it, and they show it the way they try to censor small accounts, the way they go after TikTok. They're always look, they're scared of the tiniest amount of dissent because they know they're vulnerable. So I don't know if we'll be able to do enough, but I know that we have fertile soil, to organize it in. And I don't, like I said, I don't know that we're making optimal use of it. I think we should be doing our own polling and getting and making sure that the ideas that are out there, if things get worse, if the only ideas that are out there are, the damn immigrants, and that's very dangerous. But if there's other ideas out there, say no, it's the capitalists, right? If there's a communist analysis that becomes more prevalent, that's out there circulating, then there's hope for things could go in another direction. It can always go different ways, right? Like during the 60s, there were relatively things were on the upswing in a lot of ways. And then by the 1970s, elites were freaked out. And you had guys like I wrote about the Powell memo, freaked out about the kind of like the excess of democracy type thing. Like, wow, things have got out of hand. People are going to start demanding so much more. We can't keep giving these concessions. So it can always work different ways. In good times, relatively good times, or relatively bad times, like there's always different ways it can go. It's about what kind of ideas are circulating among people. What kind of ideas are coming on?
With climate catastrophe and apocalypse in North America, apocalypse soon, Sina. I mean, where does multipolarity fit into that scheme? Like China, Russia, Iran, the countries outside of the West that are actually trying to get a handle on this situation and get out of the chaos that the Western countries have put on the world for a few centuries. Does that
I mean, I think that at a certain point there will, like, I don't know how okay, let me put it this way. Apocalypse is nothing new, right, to human history. Is that like this is something that I've learned over and over again from Red Nation work that that like the apocalypse came and went, and it smashed a whole life system that spanned continents, right? That spanned the globe, really, if you include all the different violence done across the planet, right? And so we've already trained for this. Now, is the nature of this apocalypse that's coming going to be different? I think so, obviously. Like history is never the same. One word cannot encapsulate. But is that I think the wider point I was making about is that the nature of the power of the comforts that we enjoy are so tenuously perched, right? That they're on these stilts that can go at any time, right? And so like our food system, right, where we live specifically, is that we're deeply reliant on Mexico as the massive exporter of fruits and vegetables. And it's that might be like you may not be able to get a certain kinds of fruits and vegetables anymore if Mexico has like drought year after year, right? Is that like this is something that and we can do the sociological thing of collect evidence and make inferences, but like we do have this problem of hyper individualization, is that we've lost, and possibly because we live in settler societies, we never had any real sense of the wider community and how they're linked together. Is this true for the globe? No. I think there's parts in the world that can sort of claim to have suffered less from the sort of violence of hyper individualistic modernity. However, nonetheless, it is a global problem, right? Of people simply don't have the language of community in their beings. And you're going to need it when the water system collapses and you have to learn about sharing water. And I think the interesting lesson about Gaza that I've sort of that one of them, obviously, that like the things that like Gaza can teach us is that there is this profound almost OS, like operating software to a people that they can activate, that doesn't just include sustaining life even when it's has basically the entire Western world waging a war against it, right? Against like the entire West is waging a war against Gaza's water systems right now. Like same thing with agriculture. And yet they have been able to sustain this lifeline. And it's as if there is this operating system that is available to indigenous people. I know this is like insane and like,
it's
like
not.
a borderline.
It's not insane at all. It's only insane because of propaganda, I think. It only appears insane.
Yeah, I think I just mean the metaphor itself of like turning this like beautiful thing into a computer metaphor. Maybe
Oh,
that's
I
a
see.
little
I see.
woo.
Sure.
I got to log
Too
off.
much time on the
Like
computer.
this
Yeah.
is the only language I know, right? But in the sense that like yeah, like that's something that we're gonna have to learn when the climate apocalypse hits us. That like the systems that we rely on, that the cities that we built. I mean, who's gonna pump all that water to those high rises they built when like if there's a major power outage, if there's like like what will happen to those buildings? They're already poorly constructed. What will happen when mold hits them in 20 years? They're going to be rebuilt. Like these are not things that like I don't know. I'm of this apocalyptic mindset right now for obvious
Yeah.
reasons. Maybe I was
I
built this way, but it's coming. It's coming, and our
it doesn't
leaders know it's coming.
I tell let me I guess we can conclude with this because we've been at it for an hour. But like for me, on an emotional level, having watched it happen in Palestine, I really feel a little bit like if it happens here, it happens here. Like I don't we're not special, you know? Like and like it's someone said that to me on Twitter kind of early on where like I think maybe we or it might have been a YouTube comment where Louis the episode Louis was on where we were like why doesn't the axis of resistance just let fly, like let's just do the mutually assured destruction, let's just get it over with, like it's agonizing waiting for it. And someone said something like I would be fine with the destruction of the world, um, minus Palestine after everything they've suffered. By the way, I'm not Palestinian. And I was like, that's right. Like, that's how I feel at this point. Like,
Yeah.
it's not something that any, like we're talking about humanly possible, like it's not something that any humans should have to bear, but like if it's going to be inflicted on one group of humans, it might as well be inflicted on all of us. I don't know. I don't have any
Well, you
it yeah,
think of what Palestinians have been through since 1948, and think of
yeah,
what people in North America have been through since 48. I mean, we had decades of
yeah,
the biggest boom, right?
yeah. Yeah,
And
I mean, accept indigenous, but yeah, like it's always like at the vampiric
right.
expense of indigenous people. But like, yeah, the masses of North America have been enjoying this wonderful growing lifestyle, the destruction of all of their rivals, but and the imposition of apocalypses on everybody else. And so I don't know. I'm not even afraid of apocalypse anymore. It doesn't scare me. It's just like this is what I'm watching, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know.
Joe, what were
It's
you saying?
yeah.
No,
Joe
I
was
was
saying
saying,
something though. I finished the
Oh,
thought.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I said, think about what North Americans have been through since 48 and contrast that to what Palestinians have been through since 1948. So, I mean, the cultural memory, the coping mechanisms that developed over that time, for
Hmm.
us, largely we don't have good coping mechanisms because we're in a kind
Hmm.
of pampered area of the world, right? I mean, it's not uniform, obviously, but that's what I'm kind of getting at. That ultimately people are people, and we can learn from and develop mechanisms to deal with things. But I'm just saying we've had a totally different history and experience, right? So that we haven't developed in certain ways. We're underdeveloped in that
Yeah,
sense. uh
absolutely.
yep.
Yeah. Our overdevelopment technologically
Yeah,
is almost a cover for our social underdevelopment and our
Yeah.
regressiveness,
yeah.
such to the point where they just and that's I mean I think this is one of the reasons why like the attacks on black urban life are
Hmm.
so all encompassing, that it's almost biopolitical violence that
Yeah,
specifically black communities deal with, not across the planet too. It's not just a Western thing.
yeah,
It's like a white supremacist thing all around. And
yeah.
it's an interesting thing to think about how that violence cannot that you can't escape that violence. It will crush us all. How we
Well,
will escape it is going to be different. I mean, it might be some people
yeah.
might have an easier time escaping, but
But maybe what you just said made me realize like the infrastructure for the repression and violence against black communities in North America that was built to do that violence is what they're using against the encampments. It's that is what the police are.
yeah,
They're basically
Yeah.
built for that purpose. And yeah, that would just, it just hit me that that's the case.
And we'll need to repurpose them.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that need to be repurposed, I think. I think
Yeah.
that's a great way of thinking about it. All right, any last words?
Inshallah.
Yeah.
Free Palestine. Free
Yeah.
Palestine. And
Yeah, let's do that.
it's good to talk to you guys. We should do it more often.
Cool.
We'll see you on the next one.
Likewise. All right, guys. Take care.